All right, guys, so I decided to talk a little bit about this drawing that I did because I want to see if I can break it down and make sense of it. First, I want to apologize because I lost the beginning part of this video by accident, and there was no way of recovering it. So the video will show how I drew, but it missed the first few lines and how I got them and all that. So I'm just going to talk a little bit about that now to kind of hopefully give you some instruction on how I got to this point. So hang in there. We'll do the little fast, speedy thing here in a minute. So the very first thing I did on this paper, by the way, this is an 18 by 24 Canson watercolor, cold press, 140 pound. Same thing I've talked about in my other videos. And I believe you saw me stain this one before I started. I don't remember. I think that was part of the video that got lost. But anyway, it's white, and as you can see, it's not. I just swirled it around with the napkin, as you can see. And then I spray fixed it just so I can, I use Final Fix It just to hold all this gray charcoal on the paper. Probably took like 3 coats. So how did I start? As you can see here in the photograph, and I want to thank Laura, one of my friends, for giving me this picture. This is her granddaughter, I believe. And I decided to use this picture because it's a bad picture, okay? Beautiful granddaughter. I had the pleasure of meeting her, but it's a very tough picture. So when I say bad, I mean it's tough to use. Why? Because it's mainly lit to the girl's right, but it's right and behind her. So it's basically what's called backlit. And you can see that because the glow of the hair back here, you got this little edge of light on the edge of the hat over there. And you can see some, pretty bright light right here, white, and to her blonde hair. So it's to her right and behind her. So try to avoid pictures that are backlit. So if she would have just walked over here to our left a little bit and had her turn, this picture would have been a heck of a lot easier to do. The reason it's a little tougher is because when you're backlit, it makes everything in the front darker. It's kind of like when you go and take a picture, say you go on a vacation or something, and this just recently happened to me, and we stood in front of the restaurant and the lights were in the back, right? And so we stood in front of the restaurant, you see the sign, the lights and everything. When you look at your camera, the people standing in the picture were all dark, kind of hard to see. And that's because the light is coming from behind us, and therefore everything that you're trying to take a picture of, all our faces, is extremely dark. And so it's really hard to see the details. Now, it's not that bad here, and you can see the details, but it's very tough to see the contours of the face, where the cheek turns, where the lips over here in the muzzle area by the philtrum, just underneath the nose, where that turns. And the shadows are very, very vague. They're not very dark and very definitive. And plus, not to mention, the picture is a little bit grainy, okay? So there's a lot wrong with this picture that made it really tough. Now, what I did was I took it as a challenge, and that's what I want you to get out of this video, is take it as a challenge. Can I make this picture that I'm working on, and I've been learning about values and lighting and all this stuff, maybe from another YouTube channel or whatever, or you watch my videos. Can you make it work for you? Okay? And that's a challenge, right? It's a lot of work, okay? But that's how you learn. You got to kind of bust your butt a little bit, and you got to work a little harder, but you learn more, okay? Preferably, you don't want to be in this scenario. This is really tough to work with, okay? Because it's hard to see where the shadows end, really. And like I said earlier, certain little details like, where the chin is and all these things, it's just really tough. So what I did was, in my picture, I invented, I guess you could say, I said, the light's predominantly coming this way. So I darkened her left side quite a bit more than what you see in the picture. You can see I'm not as dark. Excuse me, I am much darker on her left than the actual photograph. Okay, working from photographs is a great way to practice because you can get a million pictures in a heartbeat. Google, take your own pictures, whatever. Okay, but taking good photographs, and I suggest that you look up information on lighting and how to take a good photograph. There's tons and tons of videos out there in the YouTube world that you can look up. That you can look up. Don't discount that stuff. Okay, that's not just for photographers. Okay, most artists are pretty good photographers. Okay, at least in knowing just the basics about lighting a subject and understanding about side lighting versus backlighting and all these other things that I'm trying to cover with you guys real quick. So try to do your best to study that sort of thing. So what I did was I kept the irises dark because I try to make it look like the shadow, as a light shadow being cast down from the rim of the hat, and that's how I handled my values. And I made it where you didn't really see too much on this side, just to kind of make it more interesting. Okay, since I'm inventing, mainly because I had to invent, I just kind of played around with it. When I first started off, as far as getting the drawing down, before you do shading and everything, you got to be able to draw. I decided to just do a couple lines. The highest point, which is the top of her hat, and the lowest point, which is the bottom of her chin. That's the important thing. If I have room for the shirt and everything, great. But this isn't a portrait about a shirt. It's a portrait about this pretty girl. So I want to know where the highest point is and where the lowest point is. That low and high spot, I need to now translate that information onto my paper. So I just randomly chose something, just using common sense. I said, I think it'll fit from here, and you can't see it now, it's erased, but there was at one time a line right here. Okay, and that's part of that video where I was apologizing earlier that I lost. Okay, so I'll do some more videos where we'll go more in depth. There was a line here and a line here. Now, just looking at that, I know that I got to fit the hat and her face and everything down to her chin. And I look from this line down here, and it doesn't take a rocket scientist to see that I got plenty of room for her shirt. So I could have actually made her slight bit larger. But I also got another challenge, which is the width of her hat. Okay? If I made her bigger, say the top of her hat was right here, and I decided to make the bottom of her chin way down here, where this little black buckle thing is for her hat strings. Say this was the bottom of her chin. That's considerably bigger. That's a good, 40% bigger. That means this hat would likely be outside the paper. Nothing wrong with that, but aesthetically it could maybe not work so well. So I want to make sure that she fit completely. So when I chose this size for the height of her head, I wanted to check that the width would fit. All I did was I basically took the width of the hat, which is that much roughly, and then I compared it to the height. And it's a little bit bigger than the height. And so then I just did, I don't have a stick long enough. I did it with a bigger ruler or a bigger stick. And so something past the hat, that's about right. And there you go. It's actually about that much. And so you can see that my width is slightly larger than my height. Comparatively speaking, it works. Okay? It works. It doesn't look too big. It doesn't look like one of those big Mexican sombreros or something like that. And it doesn't look like a baseball cap that would be tied up against the head. It looks like what it is. A cowboy hat. And it's a reasonable distance. That it works. So top, bottom of my drawing. Leaving obviously enough room so I can fit her shirt. Then I said, what's this whole top and bottom on the picture made up of? What's made up of all this stuff between the top and bottom? So then I picked big spaces, right? The most obviously big space, the biggest, is where the hat meets the forehead. It makes it almost in half, except this top, let's just say half, is a little smaller than this bottom half. So from her chin to the bottom of the hat right here, it's a little bit bigger than from the bottom of the hat to the top of the hat, right? So this is a little bit bigger than this. So I come over here to my top and bottom, and I go a little bit higher than halfway. In other words, I make this piece bigger than this. I like to say that this is a 40-60, right? For 100% of this height, I'm going to cut it up into about 60% and then 40%. Okay, that's just some percentage. It's not exact. It's not a recipe or anything like that where I'm giving you some exact numbers. It's a rough estimate. I'm just trying to verbalize it in a way that makes sense for you guys to understand, okay? It's roughly about 60-40. So I went to what I see between my top and bottom line, and I went to my 60-40. And right around 60, right here, from chin to the 60, I just drew a little line. And I said, that's going to be more or less the bottom of the hat. Then from the hat, since really the hat's only composed of the rim and there's not a lot there, I didn't really worry about that. I did that last. I went straight into the face. So from the hat line to the chin, I said, is there a halfway between this? And the chin is the nose is roughly halfway between here and here, roughly. Not exact. I believe it was a little bit bigger from the hat to the bottom of the nose, and it is. It's a little bit bigger from here to here, and a little bit smaller from here to here. So I went from my hat line to the nose, and I said, from my hat line to chin, and I broke that up, not quite in half, just a little bit more past half, where this is a little bit bigger than this, okay? That's all I did, really simple, right? Can you figure out exactly? Sure, it's called practice, okay? I just get a good estimate. And I just put a little line there, and then I just gently and lightly put a little line over to the side. I put NL for nose line, okay? Just to remind me of what that little line means, because it can become confusing having all these little lines, okay? That's what I usually tell most people. Use little initials. Just don't write like this, pressing hard, because then you'll never get rid of those little letters. They're just meant to help you, just a little tiny note, NL, the abbreviations for, nose line. So I went from the nose line to the hat line, and what's in there? Of course, the eyebrows and the eyes, right? So about a little bit higher than halfway between the nose line and the hat line, a little bit higher than half is the eye line, right? So in this little space, okay, where we just left off on the nose, in this little space, a little higher than halfway, I'm going to say 60-40, 60% of this little space, and then 40% of this little space is roughly where I see the eye line, okay? It's not a third of the way, it's not a half, it's about 40-ish%. Hopefully that percentage thing works out for you in your brain. It's about 40%, and then from the eye line, by the way, I mean from the pupils down to the bottom of the nose. And so in my space, I made it about a 40-60. See how we're following the same concept I'm seeing here? I copy it onto here, okay? From the nose line to the chin, it's usually about a third of the way between the nose line to the chin line. It's about a third of the way down to the mouth. She has a mouth line that's a little lower than a third, I noticed. A little bit lower, right? That's those little minute differences between people. So I went and I did a little bit lower than a third. So I broke it down from the bottom of the nose to the bottom of the chin into 3 spaces. And then that top third, I just kind of brought it down just a hair. And it gave me something similar to what I see here. And that's a fair assessment. I didn't work very long on this. This wasn't like a commission drawing or anything like that. I didn't go into like extreme details and anything. I mean, I worked hard on it, don't get me wrong. But I worked faster than if I were to be working on commission. I usually work a little slower to make sure my proportions are really working and things really look good. I think it's a fair assessment of what I see here as far as proportions. The biggest nightmare I had was, of course, the values. It's just blowing out the pictures. There's just nothing interesting to draw other than the pretty girl. But as far as shadows go, it's really tough, really, really tough. And again, it was grainy. Try not to do that to yourself. Don't be mad at me, Laura. I'm just using this as an example. If anything, you got yourself a free picture if you like it. And so now I have the eye line, the nose line, and the mouth line. Where's the eyebrow? Well, from the closest line would be the eyebrow, the eye line, pupil to pupil, right? And then the hat line. Where in there is that? I don't know, about a third of the way down. So from my hat line to my eyebrow line, and I go to the top of the eyebrows usually. And then here's my pupil line, right? My eye line. It's about 1/3 of the way down. And I got roughly 1/3 of the way down. Done. And that's how I broke her up into little chunks. And then I said from the edge of the face, I use the edge of this, what do you call this, string right here for her hat. And the edge of the string, only because it was such a nice, sharp, hard edge, it was easy. And I just measured across there. And I said, how big is this width compared to the height? That's called comparative measure. So that she's that wide, compare that to the height and see what's similar. And it's, let's see, something that's more definitive. So from the top of the hat to her eye line is roughly the same thing as the width of her face. So at some point from the top of her hat to her eye line, I went like that. I turned it sideways, and you can see my little string. Hopefully you can see in the video. And over here, and it's pretty much the same thing. Now, proportionally speaking, I'm working with the same proportions, right? By comparing my width to the length as I got here, right? I'm not using rulers. I'm not using all these other tools. You don't need a grid, okay? Nothing wrong with those tools. That's up to you. You know, I try to always draw whenever somebody asks me for a lesson or whatever. I try to explain that if you don't know how to draw and you start using grids and calipers and rulers and try to say, oh, she's 3 inches here, so I'll make it 6 inches here, that way I'll double her size and all that nonsense, you're just going to be a really bad, extremely slow Xerox machine. And you actually won't learn to draw. Rather, you'll just learn to take measurements. And your drawing skills will actually diminish. Okay? So don't start doing all these tools. You don't need them. You just need a pencil and a piece of paper, an eraser, maybe a barbecue skewer like this, so you can kind of, just because it's longer than the pencil, you can, you know, get the idea of what those proportions are. And then from the edge of the face here to the edge of the hat there, you can actually measure that, right? Let me just do this side because it's closer to me. And so she's roughly about that wide on the hat there. I could take that and say, well, what's equal to that? I put it on her face and say, let's just start at the chin. Doesn't really land on the bottom of her chin or nose, so let's keep going to the next one, the mouth line. And not quite, not quite. So pretty much, I'm going to say to the top of her nostril wings, right? So just above her nose line to her chin line. It's the width of this hat right here. We're just checking out, right? We're just checking it. So it's not a big deal. If it's a little bit bigger, a little bit small, it's not going to be the end of the world. You just can't be off by a whole lot. So something like around, say, the tip of her nose or her chin, something like that roughly. And then from the string out to the edge, and you can see I got really dead on same proportions here. So I transferred this size, put it over here, drew a line on my paper. Now I know for sure that's the width over there. And then I did the same for the other side of the hat, just to make sure that it, from what I had said earlier in the beginning, that it makes sense. Okay, that her head doesn't coming out big, or the hat was coming out too small or too large, whatever. And then I just kind of measured the top of this, or the hat's total, and from the top of the hat to the bottom of the hat brim right there, roughly, just to check. Remember, we already had done that line. Just to check, it's similar to, and let's just go to something on the face. So I'm going to say the chin and just above the eye line. So the chin just above the eye line, something like about roughly that much. And so I come over here to the bottom of the hat line there, and exactly the top of that. So now I'm just double checking myself. Just in case I lost track, I wasn't paying attention while I was doing this, I'm just double checking myself. Always do that. You don't want to just apply this notion of what you think is right on the proportion and just kind of go with it like it's, you know, written in concrete. Always assume that you're wrong and then go back in and check it. Now, I will tell you right here, this edge, I would have done a little rounder. My paper was folded, so I guess I wasn't paying attention. See, it's rounder on this edge over here of the hat. Same thing, I did it too straight. It should be rounder. Those are those minor little things that you should pay attention to as you're drawing, right? And that has to do with getting the right shape of things. And then after that, I just measured down from her chin to this thingy here, the little buckle, I don't know what you would call it, that holds the two strings together on the bottom. I said, what's that distance there, right? And so I just measured from her chin. At this point, I already got all this other stuff in as far as, you know, distance. I still haven't drawn her eyes. There wouldn't be eyes, nose, and mouth in the way you would think. There would just be those lines that I described earlier. And I said, it's roughly, you know, the top of it is about that big. And then I compare it to the face, and so that lands pretty close, somewhere between the eyebrows and eyes, and then down to her chin. So between the eyebrows and eyes. Notice it's not going to be exact. It's not a big deal. This thing here, this space, isn't crucial. This isn't going to make or break your drawing. If it was a little bit bigger on your drawing or a little bit shorter, who cares? Who cares? It's not a big deal. So about that much is how much I need to come down from the chin. And I actually did it a little bit too short. You see that? But you wouldn't think it unless you sat here and started nitpicking at every little, I mean, it's a piece of string. Remember that. Is it super important? Is it the end of the world? Is the apocalypse coming over your head if you get this one ridiculously dumb little thing wrong? No, because my drawing ends here. Okay? Not a big deal. It doesn't really mean anything. Okay? So I'm kind of glad I got that a little off so you can see it's not a big deal. Nobody would have noticed it if I had just pointed out how technically it's a mistake and I'm off by a hair. Not a big deal. So then for the shading, always remember that darks push the drawing into the paper. Lights, or the white charcoal, bring the features outward. Okay, it comes to the surface. So, okay, so light comes off the paper, dark pushes into the paper. Okay, so it's kind of like a push and pull thing. Okay, like a hills and valleys, right? So the top of the hill would be the light, and the valleys would be the darks, right? And the little middle section in the middle there, in that little, you know, if you can imagine a little car going around the hill like this, that little middle section is all the little grays in between. So I use common sense in what I know about the face, right? Because the tip of the nose sticks out, that always catches the most light. The bridge of the nose, this area above your eye tends to be a little meaty area, catches light. If she had a forehead, we can't see it underneath the hat, that would catch a lot of light. The very top of your chin and your cheekbone area, roughly around there. Now this is much more difficult because the hat is casting a very light shadow. Now notice this shadow is very light, and I'm going to tell you, here's another little tip on lighting. The reason her face is in shadow but is not that dark, and there's various reasons, but another reason is the shirt she's wearing is a white shirt, and that white shirt, okay, even if it was pink or very light color like an orange or a yellow, something like that, anything that's very light is going to reflect light back off it, okay, much more than, say, a black shirt. A black shirt would absorb, okay, or a dark blue or purple or something like that, would absorb the light more, and it wouldn't reflect out as much, okay. Also, the surface of the, you know, texture of the surface, you know, piece of plastic or metal versus cloth, all these things affect it. But in general, talking just strictly color, white will reflect light back into the bottom of the chin and the face. And that could be why her face, even though it's being backlit, and this should be usually in a more shadow than what I see, is not as shadowy. It's probably because the shadow, because the light is bouncing off her shirt back into her face. Okay, so just another little tip. And so I just took some, just looked at this shape here and just kind of eyeballed that. And you can even measure down to this part right here on the shirt from the chin. That little tiny bit is equal to whatever on the face, and you can get the same rough estimate. I'm not going to go into all the details, but essentially that's all it is. That's measuring, okay? That's measuring. And then from the edge of the eye to the edge of the face, this is bigger than one eye. So then it's one and something eye, one eye. She's a space in between her eyes are actually bigger than I would have expected. Usually most people have one eye's width in between their eyes. In this case, her eye, and it could be the lighting, maybe I'm wrong, but her eye seems to be a little bit smaller between the tear ducts. That space looks bigger than one of her eyes width. Usually your eye, one of your eyes fits between the tear ducts, almost exactly. In this case, this is a little bit bigger than one eye. So it's a little bit bigger than an eye, a little bit bigger than an eye, and quite a bit bigger than an eye to the string I mentioned earlier, out here, like an eye and a half. And so I just tried to kind of get those proportions roughly from left to right. So I now know where the eye line is, and now I know, like this, from left to right, how many eyes across and the spacing. And all I did was just mark a few lines, and then I would just double check. I would just go like this. I'll be like, okay, this is about the same as that, and this one's a lot more than those, and et cetera, et cetera. And then basically came down to this, what you see here. So I think it's a fair likeness. It was, I just had such a hard time with the shadows that it was a fun challenge, because, you know, I haven't had a challenge like that in a while, and yeah, it was interesting. So I try to do a little tiny, like, bushy line, I guess you could say, right across the nose, so make it look like the hat was kind of casting a shadow down on her hat, a more significant shadow than what I saw in the picture. So the biggest thing we need to take away from this lesson is be careful, okay? Make sure you use a good picture, okay? Better than a picture would be a person sitting in front of you, but let's face it, who likes you that much? Who's gonna sit in front of you for God knows how many hours, maybe 2 or 3 days? You know, most people, unless it's a paid model, just don't want to do that. They want you, look, take the picture and let me go. That's what most people are gonna say. And that makes sense. So when you go light something, make sure it's hopefully just one source of light, just to keep it simple, you know, from the left or from the right or slight in the front, but make it off. Don't put it directly in someone's face. So don't use those horrible high school type pictures, you know, where you graduate from college or high school or whatever. Those are the absolute worst, because it's almost the opposite of this, but it's the same problem. They'll put a flash right in your face. And what that does, it lights up your face so much, you can't see the creases and the little, you know, individual things that make you, you. And so everything's just blown out. Okay, so it's kind of like this. It's so shadowy, you can't see anything. And then the flash scenario would be, it's so bright, you can't see anything. Okay, you can't see where things turn properly. And it just becomes much, much tougher to make it work for you. And again, back to the shadows, I made it darker on this side. So I made off the bridge of the nose a little bit darker than what I see here. And you can see some shadow in there and in here. You can print this out in black and white. In my case, it didn't really do much to help when I tried that. If you got Photoshop, maybe you can play with it. You know, that's a lot of work, but you can do it, okay? So I hope you enjoyed this video. I hope you gained some knowledge. And if, Laura, you want this, message me and it's yours. Thank you so much.